going ashore. All visitors ashore. The steamer South American is sailing in 15 minutes. All ashore who are going ashore.
On October 16, 1967, the steamship South American sailed from the foot of Woodward Avenue in Detroit for the last time. She was a gracious vessel in the water, and because she was the last American-made passenger cruise ship afloat in 1967, it was a momentous date in the history of the Great Lakes. Not only had water transportation been a means of travel up and down the lakes since 1818, the South American success as a modern-day cruise ship lured thousands to cruises on America's great inland waterways. For those people, the Great Lakes cruises offered by the ship equaled or surpassed the pleasure and luxury of cruising the big ships on waters all over the world. We hope to show you what cruising the Great Lakes was like, while exposing you to the significance the South American played historically in this very vital means of travel and pleasure vacations. The height of the era of large passenger ships peaked around the turn of the century between 1900 and 1910. It was at this time the founder of the Georgian Bay Line, Robert C. Davis, conceived the idea of building cruising passenger ships and set out to design and build the SS South American and her sister ship, the SS North American. Ships previously carried passengers and freight, U.S. mail, cars, grain, and cargoes needed for various cities along the lakes. The idea of carrying only passengers was unheard of, and this idea brought little attention to the news of the day. The idea proved to be successful, so successful that the South American sailed continuously through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and even the replacement of the automobile and freeways as the main means of travel through the late 40s, 50s, and 60s. The 5 Great Lakes touch the states of New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and the Canadian province of Ontario. They have often been called the most beautiful waters in the world due to the natural environs around them. Miss Mary Lou McIntyre was cruise director on the South American for more than 30 years and can tell us in her own words what the Great Lakes are like compared to sailing other waters all over the world.
Well, I think the Great Lakes have been very interesting to people because of the ports of call. And usually we had a port of call each day. And I think they found that interesting. And now like Mackinac Island. Mackinac Island is known all over the world. And of course it's got one of the most beautiful hotels in the world and the longest porch. And probably the most gorgeous geraniums. And the red geraniums match the red rug that's out to greet everybody that comes there. And of course there's many other interesting spots there too. And then of course many people had traveled through Italy. And they always said that Munising reminded them of the port of Naples because of the picture rocks.
The South American traveled all of the Great Lakes for the longest number of years any exclusive passenger ship sailed on these waters, 53 years. With a safety record unequaled in Great Lakes history, she was designed and built as an ocean luxury liner. Passenger safety, comfort, service, and pleasure were of the utmost concern to her owners, the Georgian Bay Line. Robert C. Davis's idea had changed the entire concept of passenger travel on the lakes. What was previously a necessity would turn into pleasure cruising, and eventually, because of this, keep the South American sailing for 53 continuous years. The South American, hull number 133, was launched in February of 1914 at the Great Lakes Engineering Works in Ecorse, Michigan. As was mentioned, little attention was given to the event due to the fact that the competition included over 40 ships which also carried passengers as well as cargo on the lakes. The country was also still in shock from the tragedy of the sinking of the RMS Titanic, April the 15th, 1912, just 2 years before. Times were changing, however, and the South American boasted of having 5 watertight compartments and bulkheads, unequaled in the bigger ships of the day. She was 291 feet long from perpendicular to perpendicular, 321 foot overall, with a beam of 47 feet 1 inch, and with her 5 watertight compartments plus 2 more unsealed compartments, she was the safest, most stable vessel of the day. She carried 12 lifeboats originally, but later that was changed to 10. She also carried 5 rafts, which were permanently stationed on the sun deck behind the wireless shack, and life jackets. Lifeboat drills were held every week, lifeboats being lowered into the water and rowed away from the ship. All crew members had fire drill stations, and lateness or absence for a fire drill was cause for immediate dismissal. She was equipped with the most modern safety features of the day that were updated yearly and designed to take up to a 33-degree list to port or starboard. After radar was invented in 1947, the line equipped both ships with the most sophisticated systems available. She had a sprinkler system in every room, water ballast tanks, and inside stabilizer. She had 3 Scotch-type boilers and 4 quadruple expansion engines with a horsepower of 2,500. She had 4 decks above the water and 3 underwater. With a draft of 18 feet designed purposely deep in draft for stability, it gave her the cruising ability to take the swells on the lakes, which are incidentally shorter in length than ocean swells. Ron Rosie was quartermaster on the South American, and later the ship's carpenter. He functioned in almost every capacity for 20 years and worked on her year-round. He can tell us more about the engines and mechanics of her as a good example of a steam-propelled vessel.
None of the cylinders are the same size. You had a low pressure, and then you had intermediate, and you had high pressure cylinders in there. So the steam was actually used 3 times before it discharged from the engine. It came into the front cylinder, which was high pressure, then it went back to intermediate, and then back to the low pressure, and on back. In the low pressure cylinder, you could get right in and sit down. It was about 6 foot across. The other ones were smaller, but everything under that was all the same. The crankshafts and everything was all the same in there.
What kind of boilers did they have?
Scotch boilers. Had 3 Scotch boilers in each boat with 3 fire boxes in each boiler. Oil fired. And once the fireman got it set up, he sat there with 1 valve and controlled everything. All he did is watch the steam gauge, depending on what you were doing. If you were maneuvering, why he had to cut it back so you didn't pop the boilers off. Or depending on what he was doing, he'd kick it up or down, keep the fires up or down, or shut fires off, whatever you wanted to do.
The South American was built with 1 stack and originally was coal-fueled. She carried 521 passengers and a crew of 157. Her trips were advertised as cruises that have no equal on the Great Lakes, and the emphasis was on service. From her cuisine, served in 2 dining rooms which handled 250 passengers a setting, to dancing nightly in the ballroom, to sunbathing on the sun deck, to 24-hour-a-day room service, passengers enjoyed attention during the duration of their trip. All of her rooms were outside staterooms, had hot and cold running water, which was a first for Great Lakes travelers. On September 9th of 1924, while laid up for winter storage, tragedy struck. The South American was gutted by a fire while docked at her Holland, Michigan winter layup. Her wooden superstructure destroyed, she was towed back to Ecorse, rebuilt, ordered a second dummy stack to cover up her visible galley vents. Her famous whistle survived, was moved to the new stack, and that 3-chimed whistle resounded on the lakes for more than 50 years. Her beautiful lines, cruising the Detroit River and the Great Lakes, also became a natural attraction all summer long. Julius Bright of Chicago was chief radio operator for the South American on her final voyage in 1967 and worked on the radio equipment for both ships for over 25 years. Julius installed the public address system on the ship and was hired by the Georgian Bay Line through the years as a consultant, installing new equipment as it became available. When the ship was launched, of course, only wireless telegraph communication was available. Through the years, Julius added and updated ship-to-shore telephone equipment, radio communication, and inter-room communication. But let us have Julius explain.
In fact, this PA system was probably something that I kind of initiated myself, because I remember the first couple of years I was on the ship, they had absolutely nothing. They had a little, I don't think they even had any kind of a portable PA system down in the Grand Salon for the entertainment. You know, they all had good voices when they talked to the people. And then I remember this was when we got into the war. The way this got started, I think, the passengers were interested in hearing the news. And of course, I had a radio. I had a broadcast receiver up in the radio room. Back in those days, there wasn't really any such thing as a portable radio that you could carry around. And the people were interested in the news. So what I finally ended up doing, I put a loudspeaker down in the Grand Salon, and we ran a wire up to the radio room, and I hooked it to the radio so they could hear the news broadcast down there. And then, then I think the next thing we did, we bought a little amplifier, and I hooked it up there so we could make announcements. And that's how the thing got started. Then eventually I got Mr. Goebel interested, and we installed the PA system on the entire ship.
Before starting her regular summer cruises, the South American docked all winter at Lake Macatawa, near Holland, Michigan. Here, from September to mid-May each year, she was painted, had routine maintenance performed, and was modernized. Every other year, she went from Holland to Manitowoc, Wisconsin, where she was dry docked and her huge steel hull inspected and repaired. By mid-May, the South American, gleaming in a fresh coat of white paint, was ready for another season. Early charter cruises included the Tulip Time Cruise, the Chicago Purple Heart Cruise, and the Chamber of Commerce cruises. By mid-June, she also carried thousands of senior classes for their senior trips. Around June 15th, the ship was ready for her regular season of Great Lakes cruising. The South American started her career on the 7-day weekly cruises made famous by the Goodrich Line, from Chicago to Buffalo and return. However, soon she took up a new weekly run from Detroit to Buffalo, Cleveland, back to Detroit, then to Mackinac Island, Munising, Houghton, and Duluth. It was this 2,200-mile, 7-day cruise that made her extremely popular and very much in demand. With 2 stops at Detroit, passengers were able to take a 2-day, 5-day, or even a 7-day cruise. The 2-day cruise left Detroit Friday afternoon, returning on Sunday with 8 hours at Buffalo, time enough for passengers to tour the world-famous Niagara Falls. We will leave the dock here in Detroit, starting a weekend cruise, and try to recapture the pleasure so many enjoyed through the years. As we start out from Detroit on a typical Friday afternoon, friends and relatives line the dock at the foot of Woodward Avenue to say goodbye, and the band plays Anchors Away. Bill and Gloria Schweitzer and Tom and Jane Delhay were 2 honeymoon couples who met on the ship. Like hundreds of others, they continued sailing on the South after their honeymoon in 1962 and continued their friendship even to now. They can best express their feelings for the ship from a passenger's viewpoint.
Well, I think the ships are entirely different. It was an entirely different type of cruise. And on the north and south, they had college students and stuff like that, and it was a kind of like the Grand Hotel in Mackinac Island, very similar to the service you got and stuff like this. It was a entirely different type of atmosphere. There's nothing to compare it with today. I mean, there's no ship that has that type of atmosphere and stuff.
Well, the ocean liners are quite formal, and by contrast, the South American was just a fun ship. It was, friendly atmosphere, and everyone was friendly, and even the employees were friendly. Where on the ocean liners, everything's business and proper, and the service is good, but the employees only would speak to you in the name of the job that they were doing to serve you, Where on the South American, it was just one big happy family that everybody was having a good time together, and I think, that was just what made her great.
I can just say for myself that she's been the love of my life since I was 4 years old. And growing up in Detroit, there were certainly plenty of other boats around. Bobla boats, Put-in Bay, Greater Detroit, Greater Buffalo. But the South was just such a beautiful ship. I love the North American too, but never the way I love the South. I think she was just beautiful. She looked like an oversized yacht. And I think what made her so special is her whistle. I never heard a more beautiful whistle in my life, the steam whistle that she had. And that's about personally for me.
Well, for me, of course, she has a lot of sentimental value because, all the time, it was our honeymoon ship, and once we had our first cruise on the South American, there was just no thought of what else to do for vacation. We had to go on the South American the next year. And there were quite a few people who felt that way, and she had quite a following of people who, that was just the only thing that you would do on vacation. When's the cruise next year? And what I think, attracted people to her was, she was a beautiful ship. She was totally a passenger ship. You weren't looking at business going on in the process of your vacation. They didn't carry any cargo at all, and they were beautifully maintained. They were always sparkling white, and the paint was perfect, and they were beautiful to look at. People from the cities who couldn't afford to go on a cruise would come down just to see them, And I think, they've got a huge following of people who just love the ship for what she is.
The passengers hang confetti over the promenade deck, and the captain lets go the forward lines. The captain must be on the bridge whenever a vessel leaves or arrives in port. The big ship slowly clears the dock and turns downstream toward the Ambassador Bridge. Once underway, it is on to Buffalo while the passengers enjoy their first taste of the ship's famous cuisine in the dining room. Dancing in the evening rounds out the first night aboard, and the passengers hope we won't notice the natural motion of this big ship, even though the waters are calm. Arriving in Buffalo, it's 12 o'clock noon Detroit time, but the PA system reminds us that we are on a ship, and it's 1100 hours Zulu time, which is ship's time. Passengers have 8 hours before they leave Buffalo, time for a side trip to Niagara Falls, and time enough for the crew to get some time off. At 7 p.m. we sail for Cleveland, the South American needing tugs to turn the huge vessel around in the narrow river. We arrive at Cleveland early Sunday morning to pick up and discharge passengers. Approaching and departing this port is interesting, but with the Cleveland skyline in the background, most passengers are anxious to sail into the open waters of Lake Erie, and they are enjoying the sun deck one last time before it's back to Detroit Sunday afternoon. The South American has church services in the Grand Salon Sunday morning, both Catholic and Protestant, and the crew is ready for a busy day.
And then we had always carried a priest, and the priest had Mass every morning and twice on Sunday. And of course he lived on the ship all week and was very, very helpful in every direction with our boys and girls.
After cruising Lake Erie for 6 hours, the ship sails toward her Detroit dock, passing under the Ambassador Bridge, the Detroit skyline in the foreground. The captain blows the traditional official Great Lakes captain salute to a passing ship, 3 long blasts followed by 2 short. The captain of the passing ship returns the greeting, long a tradition on the Great Lakes. Arriving at Detroit, weekend cruisers disembark and new passengers board for the 5-day cruise to Duluth. Leaving Detroit again, we look forward to the sights of cruising northbound through Lake St. Clair, the St. Clair River, and Lake Huron. When we arise Monday morning, it is our first experience at waking up to water all around us. For the first time, passengers cannot see land anywhere. Here we have captured pictures of the unfinished Mackinac Bridge from the crew deck of the South American in 1957. We cruise under this span and head for our next stop, the island. Arriving at Mackinac Island was always a long-awaited thrill. The island, a vacation land all its own. These northern waters are among the most beautiful cruising waters in the world, and this certainly proves true as our huge ship leaves the isle and cruises through the St. Mary's River, slowly approaching the Soo Locks. The South American uses the Canadian lock, and upon entering the lock, the chef has baked a fresh pie to present to the lockkeeper, a tradition for the South American every time she goes through the locks.
The locks, of course, is very interesting, and it's probably the most interesting locks in the world, I understand. And we were, at last, going through the Canadian locks, and they were narrower, and they were the longer locks. And we always gave a pie to the man that was working at the gates there. So they were always wondering, is it blueberry today, or is it banana cream, or apple, or what is it? And if there would be more than one or two men standing right at this one position, they always had 2 or 3 extra pies for them. So that was a lot of fun.
The lock is 59 feet wide by 1,350 feet long. After the lock raised the ship 21 feet to the Lake Superior level, we sail Whitefish Bay and Lake Superior. The ship hugs the Michigan shoreline for our next stop Tuesday morning at Munising, where the world-famous pictured rocks attract our attention with their beautiful colors, shapes, and different sizes. Munising Port is difficult for big ships because of the strong currents and natural wind shifts in our harbor. However, this trip we make a smooth stop, and after our 2-hour visit, we are on our way to the Keweenaw Peninsula and our stop at Houghton. Here we are met each week by the girls and boys of the Michigan School of the Mines Band. Rain or shine, they offer greetings, and the Twin Cities of Houghton Hancock are gracious hosts, and hospitality abounds. All day we have sailed the copper country, where the copper mines remain. Most passengers would like to stay longer, but the big ship is scheduled for a busy day, Wednesday at Duluth, Minnesota. Many have said Duluth is the most beautiful big city stop on the South American trip, certainly one of the most famous. Duluth is a port city and owes its growth as a big city to the fact that it is the northernmost port on the Great Lakes. Travel to this port by ship was the only way to get to it long before the South American was built. The discovery of iron ore near Duluth and transporting it by ship was for years employment for thousands. Now the South American traces history, reminiscing those days by our cruises to this famous port with the copper country stops along the way.
And the little Houghton band from the high school, which were very good, met us and played us into port, and were there to play us out again. And of course they were tossed money for this. In fact, one year they bought their new uniforms for the next year, and one other year they bought some new instruments. And they, of course, found this as a very pleasant experience and a little bit profitable for them, too. And then our organist would always pick up, and she always went into the Indian music to play it from there on in, like From the Land of the Sky Blue Water, and all those pretty old Indian songs. And that was the way we left Houghton, was just an array of music. We weren't there long enough to visit Hancock, but just for a little sightseeing trip. But Houghton greeted us beautifully, and of course they had all the copper displayed and ready for us and waiting. And sometimes they would even serve some of their native food, and the people would bring some of that home. And then during the strawberry season, Houghton, of course, is recognized now as one of the great strawberry countries, and people would come on bringing maybe a case of strawberries. If they lived in Duluth, they could take them to Duluth and get off the next day, and other people would take them back as far as Detroit. They put them in the refrigerator for them. So we call that the Strawberry Festival at times. We left Houghton and Hancock. Of course, we arrived in Detroit, not Detroit, but Duluth the next morning. And that was a very interesting stop. It was pretty coming in there, and it was usually quite cool, which they all appreciated. And they had a tour lined up for them there that took them all around the town and showed them many, many interesting things. And then they usually end up at the Flame restaurant. And when they went to the Flame to eat, they were given a very attractive little hat to wear. So when they came back to the ship, everybody would say, well, we know where you've been. because they all had the pretty little hats on, and they were made out of a paper plate with pretty little paper doilies and little flowers, and they were really very attractive, and it meant a lot to the people to get back to the ship and be recognized for the little hats they were wearing. It was a cute idea, and we liked it.
Leaving Duluth Wednesday night, we head into the open waters of the deepest freshwater lake in the world. Lake Superior is 350 miles long, 160 miles wide, 1,290 feet deep, 31,820 square miles in area, and is more than 602 feet above sea level. She is the largest and deepest freshwater lake in the world. Lake Superior also is, as we all know, the most dangerous and changeable of all of the Great Lakes. A wind shift, a storm, the swells of this lake have been a nightmare for sailors and a tomb for many. Great Lakes sailors respect her, and the South American was alert to her moods and luckily traveled her weekly without a serious accident. It was here on August 27, 1946, in this big lake, that the South American arrived at Isle Royale for the dedication of this beautiful natural wonder as a national park. It is the only national park in Michigan, and it was the South American that navigated her wind-tossed port, carrying dignitaries from Cleveland and Detroit. At Detroit, Michigan's Governor Harry F. Kelly boarded the ship for the special cruise for the dedication. This trip, with the South American being the only large cruise ship at the dedication, was to become one of the first for the ship. Another first would be 13 years later, when the South American was the first passenger ship through the newly opened St. Lawrence Seaway. The South was to be destined for a long career of firsts, and ironically, seems even today to be worthy of her owner's boast as the most gracious lady on the lakes. But let us return to cruising and completing our adventure cruise where we left off, headed downbound to Detroit, for we have not included all of the details of our final 2 days aboard ship. One of the most famous traditions and good times is on the evening before the end of our journey at the captain's dinner. Long a tradition on all ships dating back centuries, the captain's dinner was the grand finale of all sailing vessels. Land was just ahead, we've had a safe trip, and we can now celebrate and thank God for smooth sailing. The top-grade prime beef, the decorated dining room, and the balloons, hats, and favors for the passengers were a feast fit for a king.
Well, the captain's dinner was really quite a festive affair. They all dressed up in their best clothes, and everybody was on their good behavior and having a very happy time. And the dining room was always decorated, and there was pretty hats for everyone to wear. And the stewards were all dressed, of course, up in their whites, and everybody was in their best clothes that night. And they always had an excellent dinner, and the captain always appeared, if it was humanly possible. And if he couldn't, of course, it was because of something that was necessary in navigating. But however, it was a very, very lovely evening, and we always had music, and of course the gay hats and the decorations. And of course the stewards, as you notice, they have a little half moon on their sleeve. And back in the old sailing days, they would run out of food. So they would have to forage their food, and they would wait until the moon was just right, so they wouldn't be seen, and yet they could see where they were going. And they would go in, and would dock someplace and go in and pick up all the food they possibly could without being watched. And then they came back, and they said, now we can have a captain's dinner. Whether that is a truthful story or not, but it's the story that's been given and passed on to us for years.
Now, with a memorable trip nearing completion, we make one final stop on Friday at Sarnia, Ontario, at the Imperial Oil Company's dock for fuel oil. Even though the South American holds approximately 90,000 gallons of fuel oil, we load about 55,000 gallons a week during the regular season. This is what it takes to fuel the ship for another 7 days, or about 2,200 miles of sailing. The fuel oil feeds the South's 3 huge 14-foot by 12-foot boilers, which produce steam to turn her 4 engines to a maximum horsepower of 2,500. This turns her huge single screw, a 16-foot diameter propeller which allows a propulsion of 18 miles an hour cruising speed. That's 2,662 tons of gross weight in motion. The South American is like a city of her own, self-contained. She uses approximately 2,000 bed sheets, 3,000 hand towels, 1,000 pillowcases, 750 cakes of soap, 5,000 half pints of milk, 1,000 pounds of top-grade beef, 7,000 eggs, and 21,000 rolls. She also is a city of her own in the water with her own power and light system, sewage disposal, ice plant, bakery, church, doctor, nurse, beauty parlor, barber shop, photography studio, dance hall, bar, soda fountain, and warehouse. Ed Beauregard was the chief steward on the South American at the end of her career. He explains some of the details of the job of serving up to 650 people 3 meals a day.
Oh, we would always see that they had prime ribs of beef once a week. Always had New York strip, 10-ounce New York strip once a week. Had ham, turkey, chicken, duck, lobster Newburg, lobster tails, and pork chops, and they had a tropical meal would be a choice of, they had relish trays and an appetizer, soup or salad, a soup or shrimp salad or fruit cups or something like that. And then they had a choice of one fish at every meal. We served fish every meal. And they had a choice of 2 other meats, 2 vegetables, 2 potatoes, and salad, and dessert, and cheese and crackers and things like that. We never got very many complaints on food. If we did got any, very few, because we didn't have much to offer. I always have said, the rooms aren't the best in the world. We don't have a swimming pool. So we had to make it up some way in the service, in the food, and in the crew to be courteous to all passengers.
After approximately 10 weeks of her normal touring, the regular cruise season every year ended with a Labor Day weekend cruise from Detroit to Mackinac Island. The North American hosted her last regular cruise from Chicago to Mackinac Island, and both ships met at the island on the Sunday of Labor Day weekend. Here, college crew members from the cruise shows performed a show in the Grand Ballroom of the Grand Hotel, where each ship vied for the traditional cup presented to the winner.
And the cruise show was put on by the boys and girls who worked on the ship. They were youngsters who were in college, and pretty often they had very good talent.
The South American did not stop sailing Labor Day weekend. She continued charter cruises well into September, and with the opening of the Great St. Lawrence Seaway project in 1959, took several postseason trips to Montreal during her final years.
The ship was run differently for a charter, and they always had a midnight snack for them, and they had everything, was served down the dining room. And then there was times they used the ballroom for different things. If they wanted to maybe have card party up there. They could do it, and they use their staterooms and their bedrooms many times for get-together rooms, and they had. But their meetings, their big meetings, they always held in the Grand Salon, and they were done usually in the morning by 10 o'clock, and then by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they were conducted very beautifully, and I would say almost everybody would be at that meeting, because they did have a lot of things to discuss. And they ran it very businesslike and ran a good ship. Then at night, they'd probably be in a port of call someplace, and they'd be met by the Chamber of Commerce there and would be entertained by that. We didn't do much entertainment for them because they had their own plans made. It was a business trip as well as a pleasure trip.
According to many, fall and spring cruising was as beautiful as summer trips, and the South American took advantage of the off-season. Thousands of senior high school students took trips on her, and she carried a full load of seniors each year from early May to early June for 30 years. The sponsor of these trips was Mr. Milford Boersma, owner of Boersma Travel in Ann Arbor, who explains what these trips were like.
So I supplied to the school a controlled environment, no booze. We had lots of good food, all they could eat. We had lots of entertainment. 2 orchestras, kept them busy. Instead of having a list of rules a foot long, I just had 4 rules. No boy in a girl's room any hour of the day or night. No girl in the boys' room any hour of the day or night. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, we separate. The boys had D deck, the girls had B and C. And we posted teachers who worked for me to see that there wasn't movement up and down. I felt that I opened a part of the world to a lot of children that they would not have seen otherwise. And it was good and it was wholesome. It was a new experience, but it was under control.
On September 6, 1958, the South American sailed out of Detroit to Montreal through the new billion-dollar St. Lawrence Seaway to be the first American-made passenger ship through the complex new channels and locks. This was prior to the official opening of the Seaway in the spring of 1959. At about the same time, the world saw the upswing of travel by air with the coming of the jet age and the affordability of air travel. The South American would now have to compete with cruise ships all over the world, which had modern conveniences unheard of when she was built. The decade coming up, the 60s, also added other challenges and social changes in lifestyles unequaled in the history of man. Technology, modern conveniences, and rebellion was to rock the country, especially in youth. Great Lakes cruising aboard the South American was also affected, and the decline of passenger sales led to the sale in July of 1963 of the South American sister ship, the North American. Persons interested in cruising could fly to the Caribbean cruises out of Florida or fly to Hawaiian cruises out of California for the same cost as cruising the Great Lakes. The South American remained the last overnight passenger cruise ship on the lakes. The U.S. Coast Guard was also imposing strict new laws for vessels carrying overnight passengers. Most passenger ships of the time were built with wooden superstructures, and fires had taken their tolls on the Great Lakes. Historically, the most disastrous fire occurred aboard the Canada Steamship Line's SS Noronic. On September 29th of 1949, the Noronic burned at dockside in Toronto with a loss of 149 lives. One of the worst disasters in Great Lakes history, this tragedy led to new stringent laws for fire controls. These new laws and codes were passed giving overnight American passenger ships until October 1st of 1968 to comply. Rebuilding the South American was not considered due to the expense involved, and the Georgian Bay Line decided it would be financially too risky to renovate her. In September of 1967, the new owners of the North American sold her to the Seafarers International Union to be used as a training vessel for merchant marines. Undertow to her new assignment, she foundered in the Atlantic and sank off Nantucket Island in 200 feet of water. Within a month of her demise, the Seafarers Union made the Georgian Bay Line an offer to purchase the South American for $111,111.11, and the last of the Great Lakes cruise ships was sold. Employees of the ship and company were notified that her final voyage would be October 16th through the 21st of 1967 to Montreal's Expo 67. 1967 had, ironically, been the South Americans' most successful season, carrying over 10,000 passengers, making 18 trips to Expo, taking advantage of this world-famous extravaganza. It was a grand finale for the last Queen of the Lakes, and we will take a more detailed look of her Bon Voyage cruise in just a few minutes. Why is the South American still intact? Her career was not destined to end under the ownership of the Seafarers Union. She did make it to Piney Point, Maryland, under tow for use by the Union, but was unable to be used as an overnight sleeping ship even for training seamen.
After when it left Montreal, it went to Piney Point, Maryland, to the school, Seafarers International School. At the school, we took all the furniture off, all the dishes off, all the silverware, all the linen was all removed. Anything they wanted to take off, they took off there. We stripped it, basically. And that was done in the fall. And we came home for Christmas, and between Christmas and New Year's, they towed it to the shipyard in Norfolk, and that's where it stayed. And we went down there, and we worked on it for, I guess Bill and I probably worked down there about a month. And then the decision was to take out the boilers and the engine. And the Coast Guard gave us the approval from the bulkhead right after the galley, because you went out of the galley into the gangway. From that bulkhead to the flicker bulkhead, we could take everything out. And the meaning of the whole thing was that eventually they were going to have down at the lower end of the engine room, or the back end of the engine room, down in the deck, they were going to have a little stage down there. And there was going to be like bleacher seats going on up to the galley. And there was going to be a big classroom in there. That was the idea of that. That's why the engines and boilers had to come out. And when they did it, we got the engine out, which we took out through the gangway. We took it apart in pieces and pulled it out with a crane, got it out of there. We cut up the boilers. We started on the boilers, and the stern came up so high that we had to pour concrete in it to get it back down. And there's probably, I'd say between the boiler room and the engine room, there's probably 10 truckloads of concrete in there, big truckloads, a ready mix. We had to pour back in it to hold it down so it wouldn't tip over. Because there was nothing left in the bottom. Your engine and boilers are basically your ballast. And at the point the engine came out, the stern came up about 3 feet. And then we pulled it out on the railway. Down there they use railways. We pulled it up on the railway, and they sandblasted the bottom and put on about 2 or 3 coats of paint on it. And we cut the propeller off. Cut the shaft right off and welded that shut, welded up the rudder so it wouldn't turn. At that time it was put back in the water. And then the decision was made by the fire marshal that they couldn't do what they wanted with it at the school.
In 1968, she was sold to Ships Incorporated of Camden, New Jersey, and towed there to be scrapped. In the next 20 years, rescuers saved her every time the ship was supposed to be scrapped. Through the 70s into the 80s, she lay deteriorating at the Camden, New Jersey Port Authority slip, where her superstructure gradually corroded, getting worse each year. In early 1988, the New Jersey Port Authority contracted to tear down their scrapyard. The South American, still laying in a slip in the yard, had to be disposed of. Kurt Iron and Metal Company of Baltimore received the contract. However, a Detroit businessman, Dr. Darnell Kegler, purchased her, and the Detroit architect Michael Johnson surveyed the feasibility of returning her to her home port of Detroit in February of 1988. The ship had been declared one of the 200 American historic vessels by Congress in 1987, and Kegler and Johnson had the famous naval architect David J. Seymour inspect her hull. It was discovered to be in remarkably good shape, and during the spring of 1988, the ship was pumped out and the 20 years of mud scraped out of her. 4 tugs inched her out of her slip, and she floated. Removing a slight list in the ship, the South American was towed 120 miles through the Delaware River, through the Chesapeake Slip Channel to the Baltimore Dry Dock Harbor, where she is currently moored. These pictures, taken 2 days after her arrival, show her once proud lines and the work done to refloat her. Many people hope the ship will return to her home. She has served the lakes well and deserves a reprieve. She has also fought and struggled to keep herself around, long enough, we hope, to return home. The thousands of lives she touched, her beauty, her hominess can best be summed up in the following actual tape recording of her last Bon Voyage cruise of October the 16th through the 21st of 1967. No Great Lakes vessel has ever had the ceremonies or the tributes that the South American received from Detroit to Montreal. We think you will feel the emotions, respect, sadness, and sincerity expressed in the following actual audio recordings narrated by Julius Bright, the longtime chief Radio Shack operator for the Georgian Bay Line. As he narrates her final trip, we hope some understanding of the part the South American played in the history of the Great Lakes will be better appreciated by the generations of Americans growing up and be a fond tribute to her for those of us who loved her.
Let us go back now to the date of October 16th, to the city of Detroit, to the foot of Woodward Avenue, and the Georgian Bay Line dock where the steamer South American is tied up for the last time. Here were held the first ceremonies, the farewell ceremonies of the city of Detroit, just prior to sailing of the ship at approximately 3:45 p.m. The weather is cool, heavily overcast, and with intermittent heavy rain. All of the dignitaries, guests, and passengers are gathered in the shelter of the promenade deck. Only the speakers on the speaker's platform are located on the dock. Master of Ceremonies on this Monday afternoon is Mr. Bill Luke of the Detroit Board of Commerce.
Today, October 16th, 1967, is a significant date in the history of the Great Lakes marine, commerce, and industry picture. The Chicago, Duluth, and Georgian Bay Transit Company steamer South American departs our city for the last time. With this sailing, another name is added to the long list of departed lake passenger steamers which have served the major cities and resort areas on the lakes. Names like Tajmo, Greyhound, Northland, Northwest, City of Erie, C&B, Assiniboia, Keewatin, Huronic, Hamonic, Juniata, Noronic, Tionesta, Octorara, the Greater Detroit and Greater Buffalo, City of Detroit the Third, City of Cleveland the Second, Eastern and Western states, and even the Japan and the India and the China, to name but a few. With the South American sailing from this dock this afternoon, the era of American flag overnight passenger steamer service comes to a close. At least American-owned and Canadian-owned flag passenger vessels. An era that could have concluded some years ago had it not been for the imaginative leadership of the Georgian Bay Line's owners and managers. It is to the company's credit that this steamer, constructed 53 years ago at the now defunct Great Lakes Engineering Works at River Rouge, has remained in service so many years after the competition threw in the towel in the face of mounting operating costs, more contemporary accommodations provided on saltwater cruise vessels, jet air travel, and an expanded highway system which has popularized automobile vacations. The influence of the Georgian Bay Line has had in our city and state is considerable. A review of the year's schedule of the South demonstrates this fact. Hundreds of persons have visited the Tulip Festival at Holland each spring, boarding this steamer at Chicago for the cruise to Holland. Behind those trips have been a series of lake cruises devoted to high school senior classes from throughout Michigan and our adjoining states. Many thousands of young people have been given the chance to travel and appreciate our inland seas aboard the South American. Numerous chambers of commerce have held annual cruises in June for years aboard this steamer, including our own Greater Detroit Board of Commerce. In her regular summer schedules, the South American has run from Buffalo, Cleveland, Detroit, Mackinac Island, the Sioux, Houghton, and Duluth, and other cities, exposing to travelers from all over this country, Canada, and the world, the majesty of our Great Lakes. For the past 9 years, the schedule has called for post-Labor Day cruises to Montreal and Quebec City, bringing to passengers an appreciation of the engineering wonders of the Welland Ship Canal and the St. Lawrence Seaway. The South American has truly served as an ambassador to our Great Lakes St. Lawrence passageways. Beyond these values is another, that of providing summer employment to hundreds of college students who have served as bellboys and waitresses. Monies earned in the employ of this company have financed many hundreds of college and university careers. Our best wishes for a smooth final voyage to Montreal aboard the South American. As the last of her breed, she has certainly earned the title Queen of the Great Lakes. Thank you very much.
As the South American left her dock and proceeded downriver for the last time, all of the ships and tugs and yachts in the harbor and in the river joined in a tumultuous whistle salute. These salutes continued for approximately 15 or 20 minutes until the South American had proceeded well on below the Ambassador Bridge. Let us listen to just a few of these whistle salutes. Wednesday evening, we held our last traditional captain's dinner in the ship's dining room. This was the last time that all of us would be together with our old shipmates, with our company officials, and with our old-time passengers who had joined us on this last trip. During this dinner, there were many reminiscences which we would like to have recorded, but there just was not time to do it. But I believe that all of the thoughts and sentiments that were expressed at this captain's dinner can be pretty well summed up in some remarks that were made by Mr. Goebel and addressed to the ship itself, to the steamer South American, as he stood on deck at 2 o'clock Friday morning as the ship entered the berth at Victoria Pier for the last time.
We cannot help but say, in concluding this little recording, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Sail on, continue on, to bring the good things of life to young people in the years to come, as you have done in the years past. And so, au revoir to you from all of us.
During the voyage, our staff captain and St. Lawrence River pilot, Captain Neil McPherson, composed a farewell poem to the South American. When we arrived in Montreal, Doug Milton, our Montreal agent, turned this poem over to Mr. Larry Reed, who made it the subject of a farewell radio broadcast over station CJAD in Montreal. Let us listen to the recording of this Saturday afternoon farewell broadcast.
This old ship ain't got no topsails, towering lofty in the breeze, but she's beautiful and graceful, queen of all the inland seas. Since I was a little gaffer, playing blithely around the docks, she has carried happy people o'er the lakes and through the locks. This old ship ain't got no bowsprit, but she does have handsome lines, and she's famous around the country for providing folks good times. In this year of '67, someone got the bright idea that the Queen should now get busy and let people Expo see. So 10,000 came and saw it, saw the seaway in between, also saw the 1,000 islands from our beloved Queen. She has not the power or trappings of our very modern ships, but she showed that she was able to make 18 such trips. Yes, her age we have respected, and we've tried to ease the knocks as we entered, raised, and lowered her through the complex seaway locks. As we gently con her onward to the end of her career, as our boss so aptly put it, even heaven sheds a tear. It's been great to have been with you, but my Queen, I now must go. So goodbye. Good luck. God's blessing on our crew and Captain Joe.
Good night.
Chicago.